Norton is a name that shouldn't be here. By all accounts of business logic and historical bad luck, this brand should be a footnote in a dusty encyclopedia next to British Leyland and the Telegram. Like a stubborn British pub regular, it has been a titan, a ghost, and a scandal, and a dream refusing to leave even when the lights were turned out. But look at this. This is not a nostalgia trip. It's not a retro tribute to something made 60 years ago by men in flat caps. So for the riders who can actually sign a check for the signature edition Manx R without their hands shaking, it's the ultimate piece of rolling technical sculpture. But for the rest of us, it is something more interesting. It's a resurgence. It represents hope that our beloved sport isn't slowly dying like manual transmissions and movies made on 70mm film. We've seen the comebacks before. Norton went through no fewer than 5 major failed resurrections. I mean, I've seen the empty promises of a new Norton and the heartbreaks before. But this time, there's 200 million pounds of TVS investment and a state-of-the-art factory just outside of Birmingham, England, backing the play. This isn't a garage project. I think it might just be a global statement. It's a 1200cc, 206 horsepower V4. But unlike its rivals, it isn't a track day refugee with a license plate slapped on. It's a bike designed for how most of us actually ride. So today, I'm here in Spain, on the far side of the world, and we're gonna see if Norton has finally stopped looking in the rearview mirror and started aiming for the throat of the Italians and the Germans. Is this the bike that finally puts the great back in British motorcycling? Let's be honest, most of us don't have a professional film crew following us around to get epic shots. That's exactly why I rely so heavily on the Insta360 X5. It's basically a full production crew packed right into your pocket. And with the internal stabilization, you always get a usable shot. But the real magic is the flexibility with where I can put the camera. You can easily capture your face, then quickly move the camera for low aggressive shots on your front and rear wheels. Best of all, you can pull multiple distinct camera angles from a single camera location. Worry about the reframing and making things perfect when you're not on the bike. The X5 even has replaceable lenses that you can swap out in a few minutes. And don't forget about their exciting gear trade-in program where you can upgrade any old action camera for the awesome new X5. Now is the perfect time to get yours because they have a massive sale running from now until May 25th. Click my link in the description or scan the QR code and lock in the best possible price, plus score an exclusive free gift just for watching Canyon Chasers. When I first laid eyes on the new Norton Manx R, I was immediately struck by its aggressive, almost cyberpunk aesthetic. It's easily one of the most stunning modern superbikes I've seen, but a design this striking always triggers my internal skeptic. At this price point, and given Norton's historically uneven track record, I found myself questioning whether it's a genuine ownership proposition or just an expensive showroom piece. It does sound very lovely. However, riding the bike through the myriad of local Spanish surface streets and winding canyons completely shifted my perspective. While it's not as laser-focused as the Panigale V4, nor as hard-edged as the Aprilia V4, I found it simply more fun to ride. Now this is where this bike really feels at home. This is lovely. The chassis compliance was instantly noticeable on those real-world roads. It absorbs imperfections beautifully and yet manages to not detract from the bike's capabilities when we transition to the track. The riding position reveals a few immediate things. The ergonomics and seating position are unashamedly on the aggressive side, but that's kind of what you want and expect from a premium superbike. What I didn't expect was how good the wind protection was at speed or how easy the giant touchscreen is to read when you're moving fast. It doesn't clutter your vision, it gives you the data you need. Looking down at that crisp digital display and all of its modern technology, it's impossible not to feel the contrast of the badge painted on the tank right below it. The screen tells you what the bike is doing right now, but it can't show you the century of triumphs, scandals, and grease that it took to get here. The history of Norton is not just a story of a motorcycle company, it's a story of Britishness. It's about men with grease under their fingernails, magnificent mustaches, tweed, and heated arguments at the local pub. But all this kicked off in 1898 when a man named James Lansdowne Pa Norton started a business making bicycle parts. It was called the Norton Manufacturing Company. It was based in Birmingham, a place that back then was basically the Silicon Valley of things that leaked oil. By 1902, Pa Norton realized that pedaling was for people with too much time and not enough internal combustion. He started bolting French and Swiss engines onto his frames, and by 1908, he built his own engine. It was a single-cylinder heart of iron, and it was the start of something truly special. Norton didn't just want to sell motorcycles, he wanted to win races, and win he did. In 1907, a Norton won the very first Isle of Man TT. But after World War II, things got really interesting. If you ask any old graybeard motorcycle enthusiast to name the most iconic racing bike ever, they'll say the Norton Manx. The Manx itself was the ultimate evolution of the single-cylinder engine. It was a double overhead cam masterpiece, and by the mid-50s, the 350cc version was pumping out 38 horsepower. That sounds like the power of a modern blender, but in 1954, it was enough to propel a man between stone walls at 120 miles an hour. Then came the featherbed frame. Designed by the McCandless brothers, it used 40 feet of Reynolds steel tubing. It was so stable and comfortable that a factory racer said it was like riding on a featherbed. It gave Norton a handling advantage that lasted for a decade. It was so impossibly stable and grippy that it didn't just win races, it humiliated the competition. Throughout the 50s, if you weren't on a featherbed Norton, you were essentially just out for a scenic Sunday ride while the Norton boys disappeared over the horizon. In the hands of legends like Jeff Duke, it turned the most dangerous racetrack on earth into its own personal playground. It was quite simply the finest handling piece of machinery in the world. In fact, that featherbed frame was so popular that people started ripping engines out of other bikes, which led to backyard mechanics creating the legendary Triton, shoehorning Triumph's brilliant 3-cylinder TT winning engine into that nearly perfect Norton featherbed chassis. It became the gold standard for every cafe racer and backyard tinkerer in all of Britain. However, because this is a British story, it eventually evolves corporate reshuffling. Between 1953 and today, Norton has been bought, sold, merged, and resurrected more times than a soap opera villain. But the name Norton remains legendary because of the statistics of that dominance. It represents a time when Britain ruled the roads, not with boring hatchbacks, but with roaring single-cylinder monsters that required nerves of steel and a very sturdy pair of trousers. On paper, the technical specs of the 206 horsepower and a beautiful-sounding V4 are incredibly enticing. But my lingering anxiety always comes back to long-term reliability, parts availability, and dealer confidence. It's a massive financial commitment for a brand still rebuilding its foundation. But once you twist the throttle, it's clear the engineers didn't just chase abstract dyno sheets. They built the motor to perform exactly where most of us spend our time riding. I personally just loved the character and visceral sound of this engine. It's important we go through the list of features since only a handful of people have seen this machine in person yet. Now, first, look at the bodywork. Norton calls this reductive design. The goal was to see what they could take away, not what they could add. There are no visible bolts or fasteners on the entire bike except for the front fender. And then the engine. This isn't a recycled unit purchased from another manufacturer. It's a clean sheet 1200cc 72-degree V4 pumping out 206 horsepower, which puts it right in the ring with the other V4 big hitters. We're talking like the Panigale and the RSV4. But if you look at the torque number, 130 newton meters. That's just 4 foot-pounds shy of 100 if you only speak with American weights and measures. Norton engineered a phased pulse firing order. And the translation means it sounds like a GP bike. And if we're being honest, that's about 90% of why it matters. But let me explain it a little bit more. Most superbikes live for the red line, but Norton looked at the data. They found that most riders spend most of their time between 4,000 and 6,000 RPM. So instead of chasing a high RPM peak that you'll rarely use, they focused on that torque. You get 55%, 55 torques at just 4,500 RPM. And by 7,000, you get 80%. And then there's that phase pulse firing order. Instead of a robotic drone of a standard engine, this one has a calculated gallop. The firing intervals are 108, 180, 250, 180, and then back to 108. It creates a syncopated rhythm that feels alive. It's a complex symmetrical cadence that gives the machine a literal voice, distinct from more evenly patterned engines that we're more accustomed to hearing. But those unique pulses serve to give the tire a break, to find mechanical grip. And when you combine that with a counter-rotating balancer to reduce the moment of inertia, and this bike tips into corner like it's being pulled in by a magnet. They've also given it dual injectors and independent throttle bodies for the front and rear banks. That means it can deactivate cylinders in traffic, so it'll cook your assets slightly slower while waiting for the light to turn green. But it's the electronic suite where the TVS money really shows. It's running the Bosch 10.3 ME platform. You get a 6-axis IMU managing everything from wheelie height to rear wheel slide. The Norton reaches the 1.0 G barrier for stopping force, claiming more than any of its rivals. It's not just raw stopping power, it's managed aggression, using a suite of electronics that take more advantage of the rear tire to ensure the bike remains planted and composed, even during the most frantic stops. Now, it has a segment-first cornering cruise controls. It claims to adjust your speed based on lean angle while cruising. I mean, I'm not sure who is using cruise control while dragging a knee, but hey, the feature is there if you are a very confused touring rider. But the suspension is where it gets really nerdy. These are Marzocchi forks associated with the legendary Fox suspension. They have a linear potentiometer in the right leg that talks to the IMU. So you see, if an IMU on its own only knows the angle of the bike, it can't tell the difference between you going up a steep hill or pulling a wheelie. But the potentiometer tracks fork travel, so the bike knows exactly what's happening. It makes the rider aids more accurate than anything else in the class. But specs are just ink on a brochure. The real question is, can all this tech honestly preserve the character of a Norton, or does it feel like a very fast collection of features stuffed between two wheels? A huge part of that seamless riding experience comes down to the tech keeping the rubber on the road. Now, I haven't spent any meaningful amount of time on Öhlins' new Smart EC 3.0 adaptive suspension system, so I can't give a fair comparison there. But I can say unequivocally that the Marzocchi adaptive suspension with its internal potentiometer is decidedly better than the older Smart EC 2.0, which I've actually turned off completely on both my personal bikes that feature it. In contrast, the Marzocchi setup was utterly transparent. It was so good, I barely thought about the suspension at all. The spring rates, the damping rates always felt right to me, flawlessly adapting whether we were on crappy surface streets, rugged mountain roads, or pristine track surfaces. Trying to manage over 200 horsepower did expose a few rough edges early in the day. In the initial track sessions, the on-off throttle transition felt a bit abrupt in places, and I was surprised to find the quick shifter was noticeably notchy on upshifts, even though the downshifts seemed quite fine. However, context is everything, right? For my final session on track, the team took the bike and they put it into a more aggressive riding mode and turned down all of the rider aids, traction control, ABS, wheelie control, all were turned down. And the transformation was night and day. All that abruptness vanished. Even the upshifts seemed to be a lot smoother. It seemed like the electronics finally stepped back enough to let the brilliant chassis and engine character behave and shine, I think, the way the engineers intended. Basically, the more I rode it, the more I enjoyed riding it. And if it can prove its reliability over the long haul, Norton has a serious winner on its hands, which leaves me wondering, how about a long-term review to find out? Norton, maybe. Like, our track is big and fast and flowy. At the end of the day, we can argue about torque curves and damping rates until the sun goes down, but there's a bigger picture here. The fact that I'm standing here next to a brand new, engineered from scratch Norton is quite frankly a miracle. After 50 years of legal battles and broken dreams, this bike shouldn't exist, but it does, and look at it. It manages that impossible trick of capturing 120 years of British racing heritage without looking like it was built in a shed by a man named Arthur. It doesn't need brown leather or faux patina to tell you where it came from. It's a modern Aston Martin. It's a well-spoken brawler in a very expensive tuxedo. I mean, it strikes me as the kind of bike that James Bond would use to chase down a villain through the streets of London and then leave it parked outside of a 5-star hotel without it looking out of place. I feel like the Manx R is finally a real alternative to the same old superbikes that we've been looking at for 25 years. It's for the guy who's tired of Italian drama and German efficiency. Someone who wants something with a little bit of soul and a whole lot of horsepower. Norton isn't just back from the dead. They've finally stopped looking at where they've been and started showing us where they're going. And from where I'm standing, I can't wait to see where they go from here. All right, so where does this leave us? I mean, it's not an Aprilia RSV4, which, despite how much I love them, those bikes are a little dated now. And it's not a Panigale V4, which is an incredibly sharp-edged, hyper-focused race weapon. And honestly, that might be what I enjoy most about it. Despite my absolute love for racing in MotoGP, the Manx R isn't trying to be a grid refugee. It's clearly intended for riders like me, people who love the engineering and thrill of a sport bike, but have no delusions or assumptions that I'm going to win a world championship. I mean, I'm in my 50s. At this stage in my riding life, I don't need an unforgiving race bike that only works at 10/10ths. I'd rather have a spectacular, jaw-dropping motorcycle gleaming in the garage, a machine that I like looking at and genuinely look forward to riding all week long. The Norton Manx R is its own animal. It's a stalking V4 that sounds incredible and makes absolute gobs of torque exactly where you want it. So the real question is the one you all want answered. Would I spend my own money on one? Given everything I know about this bike right now, including the fact that Norton is still very much in the early stages of growing and rebuilding their dealer network, my answer is, yeah, I absolutely would. While final pricing for every market hasn't been fully established at the time I'm making this video, the price point for the base Norton Manx R is extremely reasonable for what you're getting. It's completely unique, and the obsessive attention to detail is everywhere you look. There isn't a single lazy component on this machine, so yeah, it gets my approval. Thank you so much for watching. A huge thank you to Insta360 for sponsoring today's video, and thank you to the team at Norton for letting me come out and play on your very, very nice, very, very fast motorcycle. Ride on and ride well.